Perfect. Ooh.
There we go.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Great. Emily, I'll toss it over to you.
Okay, yeah, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for this discussion. Ahau to timite kiatanis gitinao akakio, Ogimaa pipi goanaskoyo netisigasen, neo oma nehio otse kaputigo, magani wigan amiskowatsi waskaigane kumegwat. So my name is Emily Riddle. I'm the Senior Advisor, Indigenous Relations for EPL here in Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis Nation. I'm from the Alexander First Nation, which we call Kaputiga, which is our own name to reclaim for the land that became our reserve. I'm very honored to be opening this event about Indigenous naming and renaming, which has been a really important conversation in our city and lots of other different places. So I'm going to turn it over to our lovely moderator, Hunter Cardinal, who will introduce himself and get us going.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I'm so honored and excited to have you all joining us from across Edmonton, Alberta, and mayhaps Canada. So this is wonderful. Just a little bit about me and who I'm from. I'm from Sucker Creek Cree First Nation up in Treaty 8 territory. So representing Treaty 8 here, really excited about that. And I have a background in acting and performance, and I'm really passionate about storytelling. You know, I find that the stories that we tell ourselves about who we are and how we relate to the place and people around us that we care about the most, it can be so grounding and can really help us get through turbulent times, kind of like the ones that we're in right now. In addition to my background in acting, I'm also the director of story at Nehewin, a company that I started with my sister, Jacqueline, who is here, and you'll be hearing from shortly. And I'm really excited because I'll be moderating this discussion with our incredible, brilliant, and wonderful guests. So I thought to begin in a good way with everyone would be to start with a smudge ceremony. Now, of course, we're going to be doing it digitally, and I'll explain a little bit as we go along. But I want to say as well, this is not mandatory, so you don't need to feel forced or pressured to join us. Yeah, so I'll just give you a quick overview about what smudging is, how to do it, and then I'll lead us afterwards in just a brief prayer. So once again, I'm still on my journey of pursuing culture and trying to walk that good way in life. So I'm going to be sharing just what I've been told. There are a whole bunch of different ways to do this. So this is just a very specific cardinal branch of that family tree way of smudging. So what we've been taught is we smudge to cleanse ourselves, to really seal out that negativity, seal in the positivity. We smudge to intention set, to think about what we're doing and why we're doing it, as well as what are the values that we wish to have guiding what we're doing. And then lastly, we were told that we smudge to call in our ancestors, our friends, our family, those on the other side, and the Creator to sit with us, to make this space that we're sharing sacred and important, and to remember all of our relations, both here and in the spirit world. Now, there are tons of different ways to smudge. It differs based off of your family, your culture, and your environment. So, for example, some use certain medicines. Some cultures ask you to take off your jewelry or your glasses, and some ask you to stand when you're smudging to kind of show that respect. And all that's valid. What my sister and I have been taught is that sincerity is the highest form of prayer. So if you're coming to it from, a good place, a sincere place, it doesn't really matter what it looks like if you're coming at it with, open minds and open hearts. Also been told that, your jewelry and your glasses, they're a part of who you are. So you don't need to worry about taking that off if you don't want to. And then lastly, you should use what you have around you to connect in your own way. And that's, becoming more and more important, especially recently, as, we're gathering online for obvious reasons instead of in person. And the elder that we work with, Elder Francis Whiskey Jack, wonderful human, he directed me for how to do this virtually. So I'm really excited to be sharing this with you all. So what's this going to look like? I'm glad that you asked. I'm going to be lighting this sage here in just a moment with this lighter. And what you're going to see, I wore a black shirt, so you'll be able to see it really well. You're going to see some billows of smoke rising up. So what I've been told is right there, that is our connection to the Creator and to all things. That reminds us of that connection. And it's also as well that symbolic cleansing that we're going to be using. And it's also what I've been told, going to carry up our thoughts and our prayers to the Creator and to those on the other side. So what you're going to do, and what I'm going to do basically, is I'm going to, like I'm washing myself, sort of bring that clarity and that cleansing to different parts of myself. So, basically what I'll do is I'll take my glasses off, and then I will bring it to my eyes to bring that clarity there, to my ears, to my heart, to my mouth, and I just bring it over my body once again, asking for overall health and well-being. And sometimes I even put it over my legs, and the thought there is I want to make sure that I'm on the good path in life. Now, there are so many different ways of doing that. So no worries if you're like, there was a sequence there. There wasn't. Just make sure that whatever it is you're doing, it feels right to you. If it's just bringing it to your heart, if it's bringing it to only your eyes or a combination of the both, that's okay. So once again, I'm going to light that. I'll show you all what I'm going to do just so you can get a sense of it. And then when I'm done, I'm going to hold it up to the camera here. And almost like I'm just across from you, that's when you can take the time to smudge yourself in whatever way you're comfortable with. Afterwards, I'll say a brief prayer, and then we'll dive into this really wonderful discussion. So with that being said, let's smudge. Perfect. So you can all see that. That's great. It worked. Awesome. And now I'll hold this up for you all to smudge. Wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining me there. And now I'll say just a brief prayer. I encourage everyone to pray in your own way, whatever's comfortable for you, even if that's just, sitting there, stretching, getting some water, focusing yourself. So that's totally welcome. But I want to give thanks, Creator, for all of the wonderful hearts and minds that are gathered here digitally today to join in a really wonderful conversation about how we connect to the places around us and how we use language. And I want to call in, Creator, all the ancestors, the friends, the family, and those on the other side of those guests that are here today, to call them in to sit with us, to help guide our conversation, to remind us to be listening and learning with open hearts and open minds. And once again, I'm just so thankful for this opportunity. And I also want to ask that all that feeling of connection, that feeling of gratitude that I'm feeling right now, is sent to not only the folks gathering here today, but to those that need it in life and their friends and their family. So, hi, kinanaskomatan. Wow. Wonderful. Okay, cool. Glasses on. We're getting to business. Sorry, I got really excited there. So I am thrilled, absolutely thrilled to introduce our guests here this evening. We have some really wonderful minds here, and I'll have them share just a bit about themselves and their work and what brings them here. So what I thought would be great is Elder Makokis, would you be willing to start us off and share a little bit about, who you are and a little bit about the work that you do?
Okay, hey. Miku giheo school nitsi gason. Onitskapuli iginitagian. Maga kinogamase oktia. My name is Leon Makokis. My And my ceremonial name is, got my grandson up there, Red Eagle Woman. And I'm originally from Saddle Lake, but I live in Kihiwan. I'm a band member of Kihiwan. And a little more, I guess I'm a former residential school student. I have a family of 13, and all of us attended Blue Quills. And as well as my mom attended there in 1930. And my grandma, my mom's mom, attended one in Onion Lake, I believe, for 14 years. So there's been a real history of residential school in our family. But at the same time, um, the the ceremonies and the language I really had to relearn in my adulthood, not in my childhood. It was only after I left the school, residential school, that the doors began to open for me to go back into ceremony and to really desire the language, and that's what I've done. In fact, when I moved to Kihiwan, my mother-in-law, I asked my mother-in-law to guide me and to be my mentor, and she was quite helpful and really kind in that learning. And then in the late 80s, I went back to University U of A and took Cree. And I thought, I understand Cree shouldn't be so bad. I found out it was very different. So I'm glad I did, though. Because now a lot of people depend. I've taught Cree as well for a lot of years at Blue Quills to adults, and so that learning brought in more learning for me. And being in ceremony, the meaning of those words are more, I guess, clear. And actually, the language has directed my life. When they say you're on a true path, that's the language did guide me with that. So, and basically, I'm retired, and I live with my son-in-law and my daughter and their two boys and two dogs and one cat, and that's me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Elder Makokis. I love it. Fantastic. I'm going to toss it over to Terry, and then afterwards, I think we can go to Hayden.
Thank you, Hunter. Wapigiho squel netsigasan onetskapone kotinia. My Cree name is White Eagle Woman. That was given to me in ceremony by my father, Joe Cardinal, and an elder from Saskatchewan. My English name is Terry Sunjins. I'm from Saddle Lake Cree Nation in Treaty 6 territory, and currently reside in the city of Edmonton. I work with MacEwan University as the Director of Indigenous Initiatives. I am busy. I am also a student, currently pursuing my PhD in social work. And it's just a little bit of who I am. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Terry. Hayden, over to you. And then after Hayden, we can go to Jackie and you can wrap us up. Jack.
Nanin, Bojo, Genawea. Hello, everybody. Bidwewo Dem, Indigenous. My name is Hayden, or my Anishinaabe name is He Who Comes Speaking. That's the literal translation. And the more Anishinaabe interpretation, I guess, is the thunder comes rolling in. This was also my father's name, and that was more appropriate to him. I guess I'm more of a talker, so I Bidwewo Dem, the literal translation, probably fits for me. Megizi and Dodem, Megazi and Dodem. My clan is the Eagle clan. And Chimnising Ndao, the community that I come from, is Chimnising, or the Great Sturgeon Island, or Beausoleil First Nation, which is in southern Georgian Bay. I'm sure many people here don't know southern Ontario geography. I guess I'm the token Anishinaabe here on this panel, but that's okay. I'm Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi, and I teach at a university that I'm not quite sure I can say formally called Ryerson, but soon to not be called Ryerson University anymore. And I'm the executive director of an organization called Yellowhead Institute there. And I do some work on language revitalization and place names. I work with the Tlicho on revitalizing Tlicho place names. And I also co-founded a guerrilla arts collective called Ogimaa Mikana, which sort of went around the city of Toronto and replaced street signs in English with Anishinaabe versions. So yeah, and I'm really happy to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hayden. Jackie, over to you.
Thanks so much, Hunt. Oh, putting me last. What a little brother move after this amazing panel. Oh my gosh. So my name is Jacqueline Cardinal. My family comes from from Treaty 8 territory. We have some Nihiaw and Métis ancestry that I'm really excited that I'm able to walk with. As well as on my mother's side, I have Polish, French, and Russian roots as well, and have family out in New York. So early on in the kind of journey of learning more about my Métis heritage, as well as the European side of my family too. So today, though, I make my home here in Edmonton, or Miskouchewaskiagan, on Treaty 6 territory and Métis homeland, of course, due in large part to the fact that I really love and feel connected to this sacred place known by many names. And the day-to-day, I spend my time and energies working as an entrepreneur and a technologist and a storyteller, primarily as a managing director at Nahewan with Hunter here, and really pursuing my mission of learning and teaching how to use old and new tools together to create a more Indigenous future. So that's me, and I've learned from this panel so far already that I really need to brush up on my Cree. So thank you, everybody.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to share a little bit about who you are, who you come from, as well as what we're here to do. So we can now dive into the first question. And this is directed to everyone. So I'll open up the floor after this question. But basically, I'm wondering, in your work and all of the wonderful projects that you're all leading, what excites you about Indigenous languages or place names? So I'm not sure if anyone wants to speak to that right away, or we can just take a moment to think about it. But yeah, if anyone has anything that they want to share right away, feel free to do so.
I'll say something. I come originally from Saddle Lake and Kihiwan, and we had names for all the locations around us in the language, but it was and it really reflected on what happened on that land. Like St. Paul Manawans, Manawe is to take the eggs out of the water, in the springtime. And that's what they used to do as part of food gathering. They would go there and take that. Pagamaisipan, that's the south end of Saddle Lake, and that's when the ducks are still not able to fly, but they're big enough. They used to go hunting over there, and they would hit. Pagama is to hit. It's a place where you hit the ducks to gather food, and and there's all sorts of meanings to a lot of places, and I think I really appreciate that these names, that the naming of the places is coming out, and that we need to be able to understand the meaning and why. It's not just a name, it's the meaning behind that. Why did we call that? So this is my input into this question. Thank you.
Wonderful. Jackie, I know that recently you've done a lot of work with the Oliver Community League in terms of renaming that community based off of the history in that area.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I really appreciate your response, Leona, because it's, when we're thinking about what place names can do, they can absolutely help us know kind of where we've been, and also like how to live in a good way in that place. And so in that way, I really do feel like language, especially Indigenous languages, they're portals. And so are notions of what place and belonging are existing in relation to place. So it's place names. They can be sites around which to create and tell and retell stories about who we are and where we're going as well. And so exactly, like in my work with Oliver Community League, you know, they're at this really amazing place where they're coming together as a community to talk about, you know, who are they and where do they want to go next? What values are important to them now that they're thinking and understanding, you know, this is where the old name came from. You know, they don't necessarily want to, you know, continue with that story. They want to divest themselves of that story of Frank Oliver, and they want to adopt a new one. And so it's really exciting to me to think about not just you know, the new names that we might be arriving at and what that will give to future generations, but also the kind of work that we get to do as we build community and engage in placemaking. So I'm just really excited to be in this space and be working with Oliver Community League to be able to do this, engage in this process.
Wonderful, awesome, and Hayden, I was really interested your response to this question, because you know, not only is doing guerrilla art really exciting, but also using Indigenous languages to replace certain signs. Like, how was that for you? What excited you the most about doing that and being involved in that project?
Yeah, I think I'm just excited generally about language revitalization and place names revitalization. I think that the movement that we're seeing happening across the country over the past few years is really hopeful. I think when we as Indigenous people deal with a lot of, you know, awful stuff on a day-to-day and a week-to-week, and Indigenous language revitalization is one of those bright spots. And when we started the Ogimaa Mikana project, it was 2013 during the Idle No More movement. And so I think it was sort of really at the emergence of this more contemporary revitalization. And you know, there wasn't a ton of support for it. So we did things, you know, illegally at night. You know, we went up and we replaced these signs. And I think that in itself was exciting because we were sort of challenging the sort of mainstream discourse about place, you know, that this is Spadina, this is Queen Street, you know, this is, and that's just how it has always been. I think that's the narrative. And so for us to intervene in that, and my collaborator, Susan Blight, by the way, for us to intervene in that, I think that really was empowering for us, and to see the reaction of other Anishinaabe and other Indigenous people to also find a little bit of power in an urban setting when you're often erased. You know, I think that's really exciting. And you know, I could also talk about the research that's required to uncover what original place names actually were, or the collaboration and dialogue to figure out what new place names are, because that's one thing I think that's overlooked in the discussion is, you know, we have these historic place names, but as Indigenous people, you know, we're always evolving and changing, and so there's space for new place names as well. So yeah, lots to be excited about.
Yeah, awesome, thank you. And kind of on that note too of place names, Terry, you were like integral with the recent ward renaming process. What was exciting for you about that and using, you know, a variety of Indigenous languages?
Yeah, no, that was an amazing project that we did with the city of Edmonton. And I was so honored to be able to work with Indigenous women, matriarchs within our communities, to come together in ceremony and relationship and connect to bring these names forward and gift them to the city of Edmonton. I think one of the things that really drove this for me as a mother was that my children can see themselves visible in this city. That they can see themselves reflected in all spaces, that these spaces are safe spaces. And I think that, you know, we've been able to, I learned that I moved to Edmonton about 5 years ago, and we started doing that in the university, just expanding our invisibility as Indigenous people with language, with culture, in spaces that were outside the Indigenous Center. And that made a huge difference for not just our students, but our staff and our faculty. And so why not do this across the city, right? Why not do this in all spaces where we can see ourselves in all of these spaces. And I think that, one of the things I've worked with Leona and sat with her and talking about languages when I was doing my master's and looking at research specifically within Cree. And it blew my mind. It started to open up this whole other world for me when I began to understand and learn about the teachings embedded within our language, which I don't think many of our young people even know. And so, one word, and just sitting with her and talking about this one word, really drove my research and understanding trauma with Indigenous peoples and understanding trauma within our Indigenous communities, and understanding how that impacts us by really looking at the language. Because in Western education or Western practices, I wasn't able to find that. And so there's so much that we can definitely learn from when we look at languages.
Absolutely. Yeah. For me, I get excited hearing about all of your responses, because I just get a sense that, these languages are just portals, and it's a wealth of information, a wealth of tools that can really, enrich our lives. And specifically, Elder Mukokas, for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, how do you feel that Indigenous languages can enrich their lives?
I think it would be a major mind flip if they understood the words and the language. It would be, it is actually, because our worldview is embedded, our values, our beliefs are embedded in the words themselves. For one thing, our language is more verb oriented than nouns. And so whatever, you can visualize something just by that fact. And that there are no genders in Cree.
Mm.
And so imagine living in a world where you don't say he or she. You say, this is my relative, where you call Nagawis, Disagus, Tutem. You call them by that relationship rather than by their name, or rather than referring to them as him or her.
Mm.
So, and that our language is animate, that there's a lot of things, I guess, that, for example, a rock in the English language is an inanimate object. For us, it's animate. It's got spirit. It's in our ceremonies. And in our creation stories. The rock had a place and made a commitment to guide us through this whole process. And it's all of those teachings are in ceremonies. And it's much more meaningful when you can understand that. And I remember as a kid, up until I was 6, I came from South Lake, and the whole community spoke Cree. I never heard English. I may have only seen one white man, and that was the Indian agent. But I remember when my brother and I, when we were preschoolers, I had an older brother, and one spring day we decided we were going to go pick frogs for pets. Talk about. Anyway, so we did. And so we came back with the smallest of the frogs, and we were so excited. We showed it to our mom, and she says, "Oh, you okay, Mama? Look at these; they're so cute." My mom just pointed at us, says, "You take them back right now." So we did, and we knew we were in trouble, but we didn't know why. So when we came back, she sat us down and she said, "You know what you just did?" And this increase, she said, "E pasta huegum." Basta is when you cross a boundary. And in crossing that boundary, you have disrupted the harmony, or you've hurt. And she went on to say, you continue doing this. Uhtinanawa. Uhtine is when your actions in one way will come back to you. If she was saying, you take those little frogs out of their home, that's what's going to happen to you too. I'll be damned. It happened the next year. I was sent off to residential school. So I never forgot that. I never did. And that's been one of my values, is that I've got to be always cautious of not crossing a boundary, because how will my actions impact the future generation? And so it's guided me. The language has guided me. And now as well, having, I was very Christian because I was raised in a Catholic church. And I began to, later on, I began to question the church, question what was happening. And I remember thinking back of this incident, and I look at it as two worldviews. This incident that happened with my mom and my brother and I. And then when I went to Blue Quills, we went to confession every Saturday, and we went to communion the next day, right? That's a sacrament. And so every 6-7-year-old, what kind of sins do you make in an institution? You have to be creative. So not to make the sins, but to tell them that you had sinned. I remember listening to the bigger girls talking about the sins and what they were. And I remember they said gluttony. And I thought, nah, couldn't be gluttony here for sure. But then they said evil thoughts was a big sin. And I thought, wow, a new fighting. I could tell the priest. So I went to confession and I said, Father, I've had 3 evil thoughts this week. And then I said, Father, I lied 3 times. So I just covered that lie. I just covered my lie with confessing I lied. But when I think about it, and they'd say, okay, my child, you go and say this number of Our Fathers, Hail Marys, Glory Bees, and he would make a list of all these prayers, and I would go. But when I think back now, the difference is that on the one hand, I depended on somebody else to forgive me, and I didn't have anything to do. I just had to go lie my way through. On the other hand, if I did something wrong, the onus was on me to correct it. Because if I didn't, it's going to come back. It's going to create bad habits in me that are going to come back in one way or another. So that's the two worldviews, right? And when they translated pastahon, they translated into sin. So again, now, pasta, verb, So those things I really, I take to heart and really look at the words now. When people ask me, what does it really mean? Or is this a pre-colonial word, or is it after colonization that it was developed? Another example, I asked my mother one time, why is it when we go shopping, we say, "Ewe maiskaman"? And she said, it doesn't mean shopping. Mayaska is when the waves are, just going really bad, And she said a long time ago, they had to go on North Saskatchewan River to go shopping or to go trading in Edmonton. She said, and then we took that term and used it as shopping, Maya Skaman. So that's an old word, right? From way before, but then we've got that. And there's a lot of other words that are from that time to now. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Hi. Thank you so much, Elder Makokis. Kind of continuing this train too. Terry, as I mentioned before, you were just so integral to that really wonderful and thorough renaming process. We're using a bunch of different Indigenous languages, connecting it to history, giving folks who are Indigenous and non-Indigenous an opportunity to relate to place almost in a different way. I'm really curious, just personally, how you hope this will impact the city. And you can speak, of course, to, for Indigenous folks, what do you hope? And then also for non-Indigenous people too, because I imagine that, they'd be relating to it from a different place.
Right. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I wanted to just go back a little bit and just kind of share how this came to be, in a sense. This wasn't something that was ever done before, ever. And, you know, going in and it just started with an open letter. Myself and Dr. Chris Wells from the university submitted an open letter. And then we were asked to speak, and we had elders joining us to city council. And then it was all of a sudden approved. And we were, you know, coming together and looking at what is this going to look like? And, you know, my own mentors and you know, teachers always shared with me to take everything to ceremony first. And so I approached actually Leona, and I had a conversation with her, and I did go to ceremony, but I asked for those traditional teachings. What was our roles as women, you know, in governance? What did that look like traditionally within our communities when we were making decisions? And what opportunity could this bring if we had an all-women's committee come together and bring forward these names? And she shared that with me. She shared that knowledge with me. She did her dissertation, and I had read her dissertation, and I knew that, you know, she talked about this governance structure within that. And we came together, and after ceremony, and selected these Indigenous women who were scholars, elders, knowledge keepers, who were grassroots within their community, who were language speakers, of course, the different nations within Alberta coming together. And the hope was that we could, again, I think it goes back to ensuring that we are showing some visibility, but that we were educating, that we were giving opportunities for the city of Edmonton people to understand the history of this land. You know, because these names weren't just picked out of a hat. We had like 2 months, and it was a whirlwind of 2 months, but we had beautiful conversations. There was, you know, we had ceremony together, and each ward that was named within the city had a story. And there was a number of community people who came in and shared those stories with us. So it wasn't just our committee. We had community folks coming in and sharing the history. We also did tours of the sites. You know, one of the sites, which is in Terwillegar, the dog park Terwillegar, that site specifically was named in ceremony. And so there's such special meaning to this, and there's stories that come with it, and it relates to the history of that land itself. And so, you know, what we're seeing now is our schools within K-12, even within post-secondary, that are creating activities with their students to look at the wards and understand the education within each of the wards. So it's definitely something that, again, like, I think that education is a huge part of why we do what we do, is to ensure that we are creating that opportunity.
Awesome. That's so, was there anything that like really for you stuck out that maybe transformed how you conceptualize what a name is, or the process of naming something from that Indigenous perspective?
I think the meaning of the meanings that came from each of the ladies that were sharing the knowledge with all of us. You know, the most important piece to this for me, I think, at the end was when we had our elders, the women elders that carried their pipes, and lifting those pipes with all of us at the very end, and handing these bundles over to the city of Edmonton in a way that hasn't been done before. And I think that one of the things is that, you know, as we went, because it was like, Terry, what do we, I was one of the circle keepers for the project, and, you know, they're like, what is the process? I'm like, well, I haven't done this before, so we're gonna figure it out. But it kind of reminded me of ceremony, right? Like, sometimes I've gone into ceremonies that I've never participated in, and I am going in to experience it, and I am going in to live it and flow with it. and put everything into it, my trust, ensuring that I am guided, the process is guided in a really good way. And that happened. And we've seen that happen in many instances where, you know, I remember we were gathering on a weekend and we had ceremony that night. And the next day we were all coming together to speak and do this strategic planning day. And I had to stop everything. And I had to stop everything because I said, we need to debrief. We need to just process. We need to come together in circle and talk about our experiences within ceremony, whether if that's irrelevant to our project, we have to do that. And from that, it took 3 hours, but the names, I think 9 of the names came about an hour later. And it was just like, they were fitting exactly where they needed to be. And again, like, I think that we just have to ensure that we are following the guidance of our Notiguels, our old women, and our communities.
Awesome. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Terry. That's so powerful. So Hayden, this is sort of a little bit of a heavier question, so I apologize. Don't know why I threw it at you, but you know, with the realities of the residential schools starting to be unearthed and be recognized widely, can you share just some of the challenges as well as opportunities that this gives rise to with organizations that happen to be named after or, you know, are connected to those who spearheaded these harmful policies?
Yeah, it is a heavier question. I was enjoying this conversation around meaning and the creation of place names and the care with which it's done. But there's also another side of this conversation, right? There's the work that we're doing to revitalize Indigenous place names and languages generally. But it also corresponds with the challenges that we're presenting to, you know, cities, neighborhoods, organizations, universities around names that are harmful for us. You know, so on the one hand, we have this really empowering conversation going on about revitalizing languages, and on the other, we have to confront the destructive forces that led us to have to do this work in the first place. And so, you know, I suspect you're asking me this question because I've been part of the campaign to rename Ryerson University. And that's been a campaign that's been going on for years and years. You know, as long as Indigenous students have been going to that university, there have been, you know, demands that the name be changed, concerns raised with every level of university administration, you know, op-eds written. And I think that it's only been the result of the, you know, collective action of Indigenous people across the country through time. And I think really importantly, the activism of residential school survivors and their families, especially in the last few months. Without that, I don't think Ryerson in particular would have made the decision to change the name. And so I think there's an important recognition of that work that has to be made. Mm-hmm. I think, you know, we cannot live in communities and expect to have positive relationships with our neighbors or our colleagues when our workplaces or our neighbors are, you know, named after these individuals that have caused so much harm to us. And I think that that understanding is coming to a lot of people, and we see some momentum here. In other cases, those organizations or neighborhoods or universities have to be forced. And in some ways, I think that that's really powerful as well, because, you know, I think that the challenges that these organizations face is they have to question the entire narrative of their, you know, their history, their mythology. And maybe I'm sounding a little bit abstract here, but Canadians have cultivated a narrative of this country, and it revolves around men like John A. MacDonald. It revolves around men like Frank Oliver. It revolves around men like Edrich and Ryerson, who are, heroes to the Canadian consciousness. But to Indigenous people, these men are villains. And so when we challenge those narratives, there's I think a sense of panic that much more starts to unravel. Much more is called into question than just the name of an institution or an organization or a neighborhood. And so the challenge is going through this often very difficult conversation, which can be laden with conflict, simply to convey the harm that these names cause in our communities. And listening to students and my colleagues, having Ryerson's name on our degrees, or his statue on campus. I mean, that's trauma right there, and trauma on trauma on trauma. So I think that this movement is really only just beginning. We're seeing examples, especially in university contexts, happening more frequently. And this is all positive. It's positive to rename. And frankly, I mean, I almost don't care what they name Ryerson at this point, just that they've changed the name, right? That's the win. That's the victory. And so I'll be a part of the renaming process, but the big challenge there is having these difficult kind of conversations and hoping that it doesn't have to, we don't have to resort to conflict or pulling down statues with pickup trucks or whatever it is, but we'll keep doing that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you brought up something interesting, is like, these conversations are really difficult because we are, in a way kind of shaking the foundations of who we thought we were. And in some cases, folks actually didn't know the real impact that these individuals have. But there still is this a feeling that we're losing something important is being taken away. And I'm just curious, like, how do you navigate that conversation and focus more on really the wonderful opportunities that lie, through this conversation?
Yeah, I think a lot of resistance comes when the idea of debate is introduced. When people start saying, we can't rename this neighborhood or this university because he wasn't actually that bad. And so I think as soon as that doubt is introduced to the conversation, and, there's this point about, people not knowing. People not knowing that Ryerson was such a villain, or people not knowing that Oliver was such a villain. And then, you start having the debate, but then there's the often non-Native historians that are saying, well, actually, Ryerson was a friend to Native people. So, why do you want to go and rename the university? And I think it's just overcoming that doubt. It's in some ways, you don't want to have the debate about the individual's history. In some ways, they just come to symbolize the evils of colonization, and it doesn't even matter if we uncovered that they were sort of best friends to Indigenous people. They're representative of colonization, and wading into that debate can really actually reinforce the doubt that people have about whether or not this person was actually that awful. So I think it's the terms of the debate have to be navigated really carefully, and we have to be careful about what conversations we get sucked into when we're undertaking these campaigns. I hope that makes a little bit of sense, because they're definitely difficult conversations.
Yeah, I mean, like, for me, it kind of, and just to the panelists, feel free to jump in, because I imagine that all of you have wrestled with, those questions of, well, come on, like, it's not that bad. And if we rename that, we'd have to rename other things too. When will it stop? So feel free to jump in. But wow, I actually lost the question. Never mind. But no, that totally speaks to it. So thank you, Hayden. And yeah, I actually feel like this leads really nicely into the question for Jackie, from your work. because I work with you, I know that you really do focus on just the sheer power of storytelling in writing relations with Indigenous peoples. So I'm wondering if you can just share a little bit about like your experiences with that, maybe how it helps us relate to place in a different way. But yeah, I just that idea that Hayden was talking about of like these narratives are crucial to us, I think kind of aligns with some of the work that you've led.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, actually to just kind of build on Hayden's point as well, like I've been so like I hear that kind of, argument quite a bit. Like, oh, well, Frank Oliver wasn't that bad. He wasn't, as bad as, maybe this person, or really he did some good things. He started the Edmonton Journal, which apparently is a moral winning thing. Anyway, but so there's this idea of like we should really, be careful about, removing these names. And I think what's really interesting is that there's always this assumption of like the default is leaving these colonial stories in place. And that really bothers me. So it's just like, unless you make a really, really, really excellent case as Indigenous people, why a name should be removed, then it actually should stay in place, for the long term. The thing is for, from the work that Hunter, you and I have been doing with renaming the Oliver community and engaging the community to first decide that they want the name to be changed, and then secondly deciding what the name should actually be, is we are engaging in a storytelling process first about who this and there's a reason why we called the campaign Uncover Oliver, which is two meanings. The first is uncovering this colonial narrative, this really, really painful moment, and this period of time in Canadian Edmonton history. So it's uncovering that narrative because a lot of people don't know this history, and it's important that people do, because once people have that information, not too many people are jazzed to have a really large neighborhood in downtown Edmonton named after this person, and then the question of then uncovering then the actual spirit and the story of the community that is in that place now. And so that the campaign name really speaks to the process that we're engaging in. So yeah, so I've just seen this be that kind of reaction of again back to that kind of erasure note of we're papering over history. People, if he's so bad, maybe we should leave it so that people can learn about it. Which again goes directly against the narrative in the first place. The questioning in the first place that we need to keep it because nobody is really bothered by it in the first place. And it's kind of like, well, which is it? So this is where with these different arguments, you start to see that it's such an emotional thing for people. The names of things, the languages that we use, they kind of make up the foundations of what is normal. It forms a foundation of and validates the ways that we each live our own lives, and that's something that is frightening to people. And in that way, I can't help but find some compassion for those people that are having a hard time navigating these processes that are happening. But at the same time, like these types of challenges, when we have community around them, and we are generous with one another, and we do bring in ceremony, and we do bring in these stories, it's a really wonderful place to find yourself within. And there's this notion of there being two pieces of ethical space, which is how people kind of engage in transformation. So the first is, providing physical ethical space so that, safe space for people to kind of talk, to engage in dialogue, to be wrong, and to learn and to correct, what they're doing. So you have that physical space that we all as a community are responsible for upholding. But then there is that inner ethical space that ultimately, you journey alone. And you can't force people to enter that inner ethical space, but you can provide again that physical ethical space for doing so. And that's what I think is really wonderful about all these different opportunities to think about our history, to talk about these times, to talk about reconciliation. And if we don't change this name, are we okay with leaving it? So it's what does that say about our society, that because we're not quite sure and we can't all agree we should continue to harm some people? That's a really strange story and doesn't feel very, Canadian or Edmontonian to me. So, as we're, very similar to what Hayden was saying, like, I don't honestly really care what the name is that we end up landing on for Oliver. for that community, because ultimately it will be that ongoing process that, it will be that process that we have to go through as a community to find a new name, which is going to be one of, storming, norming, forming, I can't help but think. And it's, to me also raised a question, which is, something that, I'd love others kind of input on, because I haven't been able to figure it out myself, which is, as we rename these new places, how do we create mechanisms for future generations to perhaps reconsider these new names and feel empowered and emboldened to do what we're trying to do here? And to your point, Terry, this is the first time that we're doing these things, and kind of stamping a name on it feels rather colonial to me. So how do we install these new names, start these conversations, and make sure that we have an opportunity for future generations to engage in these same conversations again?
That's a great question, Jackie. And I would love to kind of echo that question of, from everyone's on the panel, your work here, how do you kind of navigate the issues or potential troubles of falling into a colonial way of thinking about place names? And, what are some potential Indigenous alternatives that perhaps you've never even tried but are interested to kind of think about? Either like anyone can answer that, but thanks, Jackie.
Can I just speak to the naming of the wards in Edmonton? When Terry invited us to come together and told us that we only have 2 months to do this in, I think one of the biggest concern, of course, is we need to go in ceremony to get guidance. And at every gathering we had, we always reminded each other on what is the process? How are we going to relate to each other? How can we express our love, our being respectful, yet being honest, and being able to share what we know, and to stay determined to stay on that path that we've been asked to be on, and to be able to give equal voice to everybody and creating that safe space. And just that reminder, I think I felt it really guided us throughout. And almost every meeting, somebody would say, let's, this is the path we're on. This is the process. The end result or the event or the product or the outcome at the end of it will come. But most important, let's stick with the process. And I think with what's going on, I really believe, and I always say that, people don't know what they don't know. And we have to educate. Why are we doing this? And how we educate it, I really believe is not debating it. I don't like debates. I lose. I don't like losing. No, just kidding. I would much prefer to have a dialogue or a storytelling session where you put the issue in the middle and everybody speaks to that issue from their view, their experience. So all voices are heard, and we have a much better picture of what it is that we're doing. It's not just changing those names or, it is a process. And I think, but by inviting those people to come to that process it's a reminder. It really is, in fact, our way of doing things. And we do that in ceremony all the time. So when we do it in ceremony, we carry it into our work world as well and share it. So I think for me, that's important.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Elder Makokis. Terry, Hayden, did you have anything to add on that? I think that touched a lot of the points that you brought up yeah.
I was thinking as you were talking and when Hayden and Jacqueline were talking in regards to, their process and some of the conversations and the difficulties with those conversations. We were up against numbers, like our words were numbers before, right? And so it wasn't that we were asking to change ward names. And we still had, and I knew going in that, and I prepared the woman as best as I could, and sharing that there is going to be feedback, negative feedback in regards to, the names that are going to be brought forward. pronunciation being one. Pronunciation is always a big one. But, you know, a large part of that was us as circle keepers taking that on and making sure that we were the ones dealing with kind of that stuff, ensuring that we were managing it in an appropriate way so that the committee didn't have to deal with any of those bigger conversations. And I think that, you know, at the end of the day, like I just had to keep telling myself, you know, we're doing the right thing in the right way. And, you know, we're always going to have people who are not going to agree with us. And we're always going to have people who don't understand. And so, you know, in large part of our work as well is educating those people. You know, I think I was spoiled when I came to Edmonton and I started working at the university, and at the same time was president, Dr. Deborah Saucier, that started shortly after I did. And she was the first woman president, first woman Indigenous president ever. And here I was coming in at the same time as her, and you know, we built this relationship. And so, you know, if there was something that I felt that needed to be changed, she supported me 100%. And it was something where I'd be like, hey, I think we need a Treaty 6 flag, you know, that permanently is outside, you know, right in front of the university. And she's like, yeah, go ahead. I'll pay for the flag. And I'm like, but what is the process? Like, there's processes there. And she said, no, like, this is something we need to do. We're going to do it. And so, you know, I had amazing leadership women who guided me, that made me understand that nothing was impossible, you know, because oftentimes, and Leona understood this as well, when we were initially talking to city council and talking about, you know, advocating for our words to be Indigenous names, we were told repeatedly, this is impossible. This will never happen. This can't work. And I remember sitting thinking, it's possible, right? Like, it is possible. There's always room for possibility. There's always room for possibility. And, you know, I'm always up for a challenge. So I definitely was challenged, but it was definitely rewarding in the process.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that, Terry. Hayden, did you have anything that kind of like bounced off of what you said before? I mean, like what you talked about of how it's sort of automatically, this conversation is turned into a debate. I found really fascinating because I think that put words to something that I've encountered a lot. It's always a debate no matter what. I think we're finding a lot of ways of navigating that debate and then also finding ways around it as well through storytelling, through ceremony.
Yeah, I think what Leona was talking about in terms of a method to come to consensus or agreement is a really powerful one. But the forces, the individuals that don't want to change the name will suck you into that debate, and they'll suck you into that debate on their terms, right? And in an academic setting, it's very much like, okay, well, show me the data. What's your research? What are your methods? Who are your sources? You know, and we are obviously intellectual peoples who have our own methods and our own ways of generating and coming to knowledge. But when we're forced to debate on terrains that were, you know, cultivated and created by somebody else, then it's an unequal playing field. So getting sucked into those debates can sometimes be, you know, losing battles, and that's something that we have to think about strategically. You know, what are the terrains on which we want to have this battle or have this debate or try to achieve consensus? If it's on Indigenous terms, then, you know, then we can have a conversation, or maybe some sort of middle ground. But aside from that, I don't know. Like, I mean, so much was going off when I was hearing everybody else speak. You know, I think one of the things that Terry was mentioning about, you know, just doing it, and anything is possible. Like, we never expected we were going to change. I mean, I never expected we were going to change the name of the university. I never thought it was going to happen. For years, I was like, no, let's just use the name of the university as leverage, and we'll get more Indigenous hires and curriculum. But I never expected it to happen. And then, wave after wave, momentum, just kept building and building and building and building, and we're going to change the name. So you can feel, I think, pessimistic or cynical or even hopeless, but I think that there's examples out there that we can draw on and other communities can draw on to say, you know what, actually, this is possible. And another thing, I don't want to take up too much time, but like on pronunciation, one of the things that we're talking about is helping non-native folks, learn, not only learn their histories, but learn our languages. And I think a lot of people get upset when they hear, I hear someone like, Anushanub, there's the mispronouncing the nation that I'm coming, but I'm like, oh, this is so embarrassing and insulting. But at the same time, I sort of like it because it's forcing those people to learn humility. They're being forced to use their tongues and their lips in ways that they're not used to, and watching them stumble through the pronunciation of our words in an effort to learn, like, that's actually kind of a nice thing to say if it's done or nice thing to see if it's done in a genuine way. And then the last thing I'll say, again, I'm sort of all over the place here, but to Jackie's question about, how do we name or rename places that are not colonial? I think, again, Leona sort of mentioned it earlier, how we had different names for different eras. We had a name for this place prior to the arrival of settlers. We had a name for this place when settlers arrived. We had a name for this place when settlers, left and came back. We have a name for this place today. So, I mean, that's the beautiful thing about our languages. In a lot of ways, we have literal translations. We have, more animate translations. The words change through time. So maybe an anti-colonial approach to naming is to recognize that these names are actually fluid. And there could be many names. I mean, when I was introducing myself, I talked about 3 different names for my community. There's actually 4 different names that I know of. So that could be one possibility.
Cool. Okay, that's great. We'll just let that. That was so wonderful. Thank you all so much for that. My last, it could be second last, who knows? But this question here is directed towards everyone, so feel free to jump in. And I also really do love the crosstalk that's starting to happen, so I encourage that as well. But a lot of people and organizations, they're starting to take more steps to share authentic, intentional acknowledgements of their relationships with Indigenous peoples, place, territories, treaties, and so on. And I'm just curious, from each of your unique perspectives, where do you see this movement heading, and how do you hope it tangibly transforms our lives? Sort of getting at why are we doing this in the first place, and what's going to happen? So, I'm not sure who'd like to begin, but I'm happy to pick people because this is great.
I had a thought that came to mind immediately, especially after listening to Hayden, well, actually everyone on the panel, because you've all been involved in this type of work. But like, what will our youth be thinking about their own personal power now that they've just seen, our generations just do stuff, and people say you can't do that, and us being like, watch us. And I can't help but think, like, how, if I were 10 or 11, like, how would I be thinking about my own power? Because that was something that was such a palpable thing for me when I was growing up. Was, there wasn't a lot of representation in our curriculum. There wasn't a lot of I grew up in a neighborhood where there weren't a lot of Indigenous people, and so is this sense of invisibility that was so strong, as a really strong memory from me growing up. And so, I can't imagine what I would feel like and what I would imagine would be possible by just, seeing people like us just be like, well, why not? Like, why not us? Why not now? Let's do it. So that came to mind for me first. And, building on that as well, like, I am I am just really excited about, how we can, just think about if people feel more connected to place and history and this story of who we are and where we're going. I can't help but feel like everybody would actually, and this is so important to me, is how will people treat the land ultimately, as if they feel connected to this place and understand its history and how amazing, and I'm based here in Amiskashiwaskiagan and I love this place. When they understand how deep the history is here, you'll walk in a gentler, kinder way, and you'll treat the people who share this place as well and are continuing the story with you gently and in a different way. And then, like, at that point, like anything, again, more is possible. So that's what I'm that's kind of what drives me in engaging in this work is just kind of bringing that forward and just imagining what might be possible with that spirit, that symbolic flame at the core of our city, of our Otana. So yeah, it came to mind for me first, and I'm so jazzed to be on this panel, just to listen and be able to interject. So yeah, thanks for letting me butt in first.
No worries. Yeah, and just for those listening, jazzed is actually a Cree word. Anyways, okay, sorry. Would anyone else like to add to that? Thank you so much, Jackie. That was wonderful.
I believe we're in the power to make changes. And I for myself have always felt that, I often react to my experience in residential school. And of course, you had to ask for permission all the time. So I thought, no, I'm not. In the work that I do, I'll just go ahead and just do it, because oftentimes there's so many levels of no's all the way up. But when you just do it, they begin to recognize, oh, they just did it. So why just ask for forgiveness? And the other thing that I always keep in mind is that our responsibility for 7 generations into the future, and that's Mother Earth. We really have to. It's not just naming these places. It's knowing our responsibility, each and every one of us. Where are our kids 7 generations from now? What will they have if we don't take responsibility for ensuring Mother Earth is here, clean water, clean air, all of those things? So I think we need to keep talking about that, because it's everybody's responsibility. So hi.
Yeah, wait, that's awesome. Okay, great. Terry, Hayden, anything come to mind there when we're talking about these statements, these moments to recognize the relationships that we have to people, to place, to ideas?
Yeah, no, thank you, Leona. I remember I was riding with she was 7 then, so that would have been last year, and I was riding with my 7-year-old, and I said, and we were just having conversation, and I said to her, "Do you know what I do? Like, do you know what I do for a job?" We're just asking each other questions, and she said, and she was quiet, and she was sitting there, and she was quiet, and she was thinking about it. And she said, "You make things Cree. That's what you do." And so in the most simplest form, right, that she understands the work that I do in community is in relation to language and culture and Indigenous education. And so, part of that, I think that one of the things, when we speak to organizations or other entities that are wanting to do some of this work, my advice or my recommendation is that you have your Indigenous grassroots folks leading that completely. And if you are seeking out a specific Indigenous name, that you let that group do that work as however they need to do it. Because again, depending on which nation is working on that project, they're going to have their own cultural teachings and processes. What happens is that you can find that sometimes there can be some difficulty when you're, maybe bringing in one Indigenous person and putting it on one Indigenous person to give an Indigenous name or give history to an Indigenous name within a colonial process, right? And that doesn't work. The other piece is trusting. If an organization or anybody wants to, do this meaningful work, trust is definitely a big part of that. Trusting the people to do that work. And I know that the city of Edmonton really put their trust in us. They really put their trust in us and said, here you go, let us learn from you. Can we kind of be the flies on the wall and watch this process unfold? And we had the city's naming committee, because we were the sub-Indigenous naming committee, so the naming committee for the city, that were witnesses to this process and that watched it unfold in a very respectful way. And I think that, and the time is now. I think that, if we see this coming up, I wrote a letter, to our trustees last year in regards to another school I feel should be renamed. And so again, I really stress that it's important for our own community members to be submitting these names. Not the names, submitting these letters, advocating for some of this change. But I think that, the city made it easier for myself and Rob Houle, who were the consultants in this project, and who were the circle keepers, in trusting us to do this work. And that was important for us.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Terry. Hayden, did you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's a lot to say, but I think one of the things that I keep coming back to is the meaning. I think we can, when we're doing the process of renaming, a lot of the times we can just get caught up in the literal. But I was thinking when I heard Jackie use the word Otina, I think, so that's the Cree word for city for Anishinaabe, it's Odina, with like D instead of T, but that is derived from the word for nation for us, which is sort of like Odenua. And you could just say, okay, well that just means city, or that just means nation. But you get into it with elders and fluent language speakers, and you realize the translation is actually an interconnected web of hearts. Okay, so now you that changes your entire worldview when you start thinking about a collection of individuals in a community, right? And this is something that Leona was talking about in the very beginning. Like, let's rename, let's revitalize languages, and let's start changing our worldview rooted in the actual meaning of the language. And I think that that's where real transformation happens, at the individual and collective level. And so when we're thinking about, what can organizations do, or universities or cities do, like, it's helping us get to that place. And so I think right now we are sort of at a crossroads, or a fork in the road, or whatever you want to say, where there's the attempts to appear like you're doing reconciliatory work, the superficial gestures, maybe like land acknowledgements, or like some sort of feathers on a banner or something. I don't know. Like, you all know what I'm talking about. Superficial stuff that's just like almost tokenistic. And that's the easy path, right? That's the easy route. And so a lot of people, organizations, institutions, cities, they do that. And then there's the more substantive. And if, our neighbors and friends are really serious about supporting us and moving towards this just relationship, those with power and privilege and resources can do things like fund language revitalization programs and projects. They can send, Cree kids to school tuition free to learn the language. There are all these avenues to support this work that are meaningful and substantive, and can actually get us to a place of true transformation. And I think it's it's our job right now at this moment to push them towards the substantive and away from the superficial. And then we might have a future, where my own kids who are 7 years old and 9 years old can live a life that was more, or that is more Indigenous than the life that I lived as a kid, right? And I think that that's a huge, that's a good way to measure things, I think, for me personally. And so yeah, that's what I think about that.
This is so great. There's been so many times in this conversation where I just wanted to scream out of sheer joy because this is just so great. Just all of this knowledge and beautiful thoughts just made me want to go, I'm really glad I did it. Yeah.
I think you need to let out a good Sagway, Hunter.
Yeah, exactly. I think. I will save everyone that, though I did win a Cappy when I was younger, so I will say that. Anyways, so before I wrap, I just wanted to have like a moment to have some really shameless self-promotion. Is there anything that either of you are working on that you're really excited about? And it doesn't even have to be work as well. It could just be things that you're looking forward to. I'm super curious about that. I also want to make sure that, the folks, the 92 people that are listening right now, thank you so much for coming, 92 people, know about what you're doing and how they can support you as well. So if you got any Kickstarters for new bikes, now's the time to share that.
Well, I guess I can go. Oh, sorry, Leona, please.
Wow.
I'm going to create me dance. Go ahead.
We've been developing a training program, a land-based training program, and COVID just shot it out of there. But anyway, we put it online. But I have found, even with the researching how it impacted people, it really opened their minds to who we really are and have an understanding. And that fear of getting to know us or being on our land, it just dissipated because of the information and the knowledge that they got and the connection to community members and developing those relationships, I think is so key. And it continues to, like I said, and I don't want to offend anybody when I say they don't know what they don't know. It's the way the system has been set up for all of us. We learned about the Western way, but they never learned. And when we start talking about who we are and what our teachings are, they're so open to this, to that information, to that knowledge, and I think the more people we educate in that form, I think we have a chance in really creating multitaswak is what we call helpers. We help each other, or allies. And so, because I think many people want to, but they just don't know how. Or they still don't have the information, so, or the connections or the relationships. So that's where I'm coming from. Come to my class. No, I'm just kidding.
Thank you so much, Elder Mukokis. Jackie, you can share now.
Okay, great. I'm so glad, Leona, that you went first. So sorry for getting in the way there. No, so I have two things. I mean, first is the Oliver renaming initiative is ongoing. We are hoping to not only have folks that reside in Oliver community to engage in this process, but also folks all across all across the province as well, to engage in the storytelling process. We're so we're so aware that this process we're engaging in is one that will be a space for people to actually learn from. The process, we're trying to keep as transparent as possible so that folks can see what works, what doesn't, and then not make the same mistakes as they engage in whatever renaming process they're taking part in. And then as a huge swerve, I'm working with an organization called Spirit Foundation, which is they're an organization that develops cryptocurrencies and specifically backed and supporting Indigenous people. So really interesting projects. I highly encourage people to go check it out if you want to exit the Canadian economy in some small way. So it really interesting work, and I'm so delighted to be a part of that work there. So that's me. Off to you.
Awesome. What a great sentence, Jackie. If you want to exit the Canadian economy, you can reach out to Jackie. Awesome. Yeah, Hayden, Terry, anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, sure. So I was just looking at the comments, and so I created with my best friend a podcast called Two Crees in a Pod when COVID started. And so initially when we started doing it, we knew that we needed some resources for students in the classroom in post-secondary because of COVID. And we didn't know what the heck we were doing. Like, seriously, never done a podcast in our life. And I still sometimes wonder if we know what we're doing, but we record from my phone. And so we have a program that we've downloaded. But it blew up in the sense that we had amazing folks be guests on our podcast. And initially, our first season, we were looking at interviewing social work scholars, Indigenous scholars who, really were trailblazers for us in post-secondary and in social work education, Indigenous social work education. Leona, we started in ceremony, and then we sat with Leona at Blue Quills University and did our first podcast with her there. And then we've interviewed, Dr. Cindy Blackstock, Dr. Michael Yellowbird, just amazing folks across the country. And we've been going ever since. And so it's, we have different seasons where we focused on different themes. So whether that is elders, knowledge keepers, sharing of different topics, we've had grassroots folks. So talking about decolonizing even our understanding cancer from a decolonizing perspective. And so it's been amazing. Like, I think that it's one of my favorite things to do because I get to sit with like amazing people and listen to them every week. And it's so cool. But the other thing that I do as well with my co-host Amber Dion is we have developed a Nehio trauma-informed practice training. And that, again, was in consultation with Leona and some of the research we did around the language as well and understanding trauma. And so we've been doing, obviously, we went online as well. We've been doing our full day online training, but we've been working a lot with educators. So looking at providing opportunities virtually across Canada for educators and social workers and pretty much everybody. So it's been quite the journey, the COVID journey, I call it, but that's what I've been up to.
Wonderful. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing there, Terry. Hayden, anything that you'd like to share?
I don't think anything that's sort of coming out or will be public anytime soon. I mean, I work at the Yellowhead Institute, and you can look up the work that we do there, and the Ogimaa Mikana project, which is that guerrilla art collective that we work on renaming various neighborhoods and streets in the city unofficially. But recently I moved out to my grandmother's territory, just on the border of Alderville First Nation, and fortunate to have some land here, and really being inspired by really young Anishinaabe speakers like Joe Pitawanakwat and Quinn Masajui, and I'm really interested in revitalizing Anishinaabe names for plants, animals, and really coming to understand our relationships in those ways. And this will hopefully lead to some youth gatherings to the Land Relationship Super Collective based out of U of T. And so those gatherings will start happening maybe in the spring or summer. But yeah, I think that's some work that I'm really excited to be doing.
Wonderful. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, everyone. I hope that all the folks listening can support you in the way that works best for them. So what I would like to do now is to close in a good way, to send those ancestors and those spirits that came to sit with us on home to the other side. So I'll share a few words. The glasses will be coming off shortly. And then I'll toss it over to Emily to share some closing remarks as well. I just encourage everyone to pray in whatever way is comfortable for them. I want to give thanks once again, Creator, for this wonderful panel, the wonderful folks who joined us listening, really felt connected, and I'm so grateful for this opportunity. And I also want to say thanks to those spirits, those ancestors, our friends, and our family, those on the other side that came to sit with us this evening. I ask that they have safe journeys home. And I want to give thanks one more time to them and everyone here. So, hi, kenanaskometan. Awesome. Emily, if over to you. Boom, there you are.
Here I am. Yes, it was very nice to be a fly on the wall and just listen to you all. It was a very lovely and productive panel. And I probably will be watching back. The archive will be available immediately after this at this link. If you want to check it out or send it to anyone else. I don't have too much to say other than I'm super grateful that you all joined us. If you're interested in checking out other Indigenous events that the library puts on, go to epl.ca/Indigenous, and we have bi-weekly sessions with our elder in residence, Noko and Joanne. We also have Nehiawe Win and Nakota classes actually starting up this fall too. So I encourage you to check that out as well. And I hope you all have a good evening, everyone watching and our panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See everyone.
Bye.
Nagateta.
Tapwe.